All right, just put that prayer card away for just a moment. We're going to turn to the book of Joel tonight. So I don't know if you got a chance to have a look in advance. Cal is nodding his head. Oftentimes when we say people are nodding their head in church, that's a bad sign. Wake up! Stop nodding. But no, that's a good sign. He's saying yes. Joel chapter number 1. Now, I look back, Hosea, we started that a couple of months ago, but there's 11 chapters there. Joel, 3 chapters. We're not going to be long here in the book of Joel, and it's a wonderful little book. It can be a couple of things just as we read the first chapter and just about the book of Joel. Locusts, key part of the book of Joel, which you would have seen if you read it in advance. And also the day of the Lord is mentioned on a frequent occasion, on 4 or 5 different times that the day of the Lord is mentioned. What's that? Oh. They are mentioned twice. Yeah, so once in chapter 2, once in chapter 3, but yes. All right, Joel chapter number 1. I'll read through it, follow along, and then I'll take some feedback this evening. Verse number 1 says, "The word of the Lord that came to Joel, the son of Pethuel, hear this, ye old men, and give ear, all ye inhabitants of the land. Hath this been in your days, or even in the days of your fathers? Tell ye your children of it, and let your children tell their children, and their children another generation. That which the palmer worm hath left, hath the locust eaten, and that which the locust hath left, hath the cankerworm eaten, and that which the cankerworm hath left, hath the caterpillar eaten. Awake, ye drunkards, and weep, and howl, all ye drinkers of wine, because of the new wine, for it is cut off from your mouth. For a nation is come up upon my land strong and without number, whose teeth are the teeth of a lion, and he hath cheek teeth of a great lion. He hath laid my vine waste, and barked my fig tree. He hath made it clean, bare, and cast it away. The branches thereof are made white. Lament like a virgin girded with sackcloth for the husband of your youth, of her youth. The meat offering and the drink offering is cut off from the house of the Lord. The priests, the Lord's ministers, mourn. The field is wasted, the land mourneth, for the corn is wasted. The new corn is dried up, the oil languisheth. Be ye ashamed, O ye husbandmen, howl, O ye vine dressers, for the wheat and for the barley, because the harvest of the field is perished. The vine is dried up, and the fig tree languisheth, the pomegranate tree, the palm tree also, and the apple tree, even all the trees of the field are withered, because joy is withered away from the sons of men. Gird yourselves and lament, ye priests. Howl, ye ministers of the altar. Come, lie all night in sackcloth, ye ministers of my God. For the meat offering and the drink offering is withholden from the house of your God. Sanctify ye a fast, call a solemn assembly, gather the elders and all the inhabitants of the land into the house of the Lord your God, and cry unto the Lord, Alas for the day! For the day of the Lord is at hand, and its destruction from the Almighty shall it come. Is not the meat cut off before our eyes, yea, joy and gladness from the house of our God? The seed is rotten under their clods. The garners are laid desolate. The barns are broken down, for the corn is withered. How do the beasts groan? The herds of cattle are perplexed, because they have no pasture. Yea, the flocks of sheep are made desolate. O Lord, to thee will I cry, for the fire hath devoured the pastures of the wilderness, and the flame hath burned all the trees of the field. The beasts of the field cry also unto thee, for the rivers of waters are dried up, and the fire hath devoured the pastures of the wilderness. Joel chapter number 1. All right, thoughts, feedback, comments. What do we got? What do you got from reading this week? Have you read it before? Have you looked at it before? A few other nods, like yes, I read it in advance, and I know some of you have mentioned it and discussed it. Talked about it, read it. Even less, 3. Yeah. Yeah, I found this with, yeah, it's sort of like the Psalms, where sometimes you get the big long chapters, and sometimes that works in your favor because there's more to try and glean, and then the little ones are good at times because it's easier to pinpoint what's being said rather than trying to piece it together. But yeah, just 3. Not even the shortest of the minor prophets. Cal is itching to go here. What you got, Cal?
Well, we had an interesting discussion this afternoon
We did.
on chapter verse 15.
Yes. The day of the Lord. Yes.
Judgment to the day of Christ.
Yes.
The whole chapter is a judgment chapter on Israel. The day of the Lord is the tribulation, the great tribulation.
I'm going to, at the end of, after the 3rd chapter, the 4th chapter is going to be the 4th one you're talking about. I've already planned in the 4th. But the 4th one, after we do the 3 chapters over the next 3 weeks, the 4th one, I want to go back and I want to look at the day of the Lord in all the places in the Bible. Just sort of look where what it says about the day of the Lord. Starts in Isaiah. Ezekiel mentions the day of the Lord. Joel, Zephaniah, Amos. And then it's mentioned in the New Testament as well. The day of the Lord, what is it? What does it say about it? And Joel has a lot to say about the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord. The time of Jacob's trouble is found once in Jeremiah. Yeah. Yep. So, yeah. So you're going to try and tie all those verses, or at least have a look. At least look at them, and you can see what the Bible says about the day of the Lord. The day of Christ that Cal's mentioning is mentioned in, we were talking about, was it 2 Thessalonians chapter number 2? Yeah. There's actually 3 other references to the day of Christ in Paul's writings in the New Testament. We'll stick with Joel tonight. We'll stick, yeah. Yeah, no, yeah. Any other thoughts? And we have observations out of this before I can give you my notes here in a minute. But yeah,
between from verse 1 up to 4, it's a devastation.
Yes.
Great famine.
Yep.
And it talks about the past and then the coming days, I think, because you need to tell the children's children.
Yeah.
And then you can see the types of insects. Palm worm, it affects, I think, the staple food of the olden days, or even today.
Yeah.
The date palm.
Yeah.
And other things, the vineyard.
Every tree.
Every fruit, and including meat from animals.
Well, the animals are affected because all the greenery is eaten. Yeah.
So it's a chain reaction, and then on 13, I don't know if it is calling for repentance before it happened.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I think he's using the event rather than prophesying the event. He's using what's taking place, much like Hosea used the circumstances of his life and used that as the illustration and used that as the message. Joel also uses what's taking place in the world around him, which is the locust, the palmer worm, the cankerworm, this absolute devastation that's taking place. He uses current events to bring their attention back to God, which we can still do today. Ben. I don't know. I've never. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the flow of the chapter in what it's saying is just saying that the locusts come through, the palmer worm, the cankerworm, the locusts, they devour everything that's green. And it's like wave after wave after wave, completely eradicate the land, destroy the land. What you're left there with is then the beasts of the field are languishing because there's no food for them. And so that struggles, what Jude mentions, is that the suffering that goes on to that. And then once everything's devoured, then it seems like there's a drought involved in this as well. And the drought comes through and everything dries up. And we know here in Australia, when it goes dry and it goes brown, The next thing is the fires, and the fires, they've got the same process here. The fires are going through. It's just destruction has taken place in the land, which is prophesied. God actually said that those things would happen. In fact, while we're talking about it, go back to Leviticus and have a look at this. Leviticus chapter number 26, and then we'll also look at Deuteronomy 28. But Leviticus 26 says this. The old covenant, this is what I was talking about Ariadne, this is what I basically emailed and saying to them, was that I disagree. They say that the new covenant, which is found in Jesus Christ, the new covenant is basically, it's not their words, it's my words, but basically a power supplement, an energy supplement for them to be able to obey the Old Testament. They fail in the Old Testament, Jesus comes along to help you obey the Old Testament. And so basically they're saying, right, your way that you're saved is by grace through Jesus. You believe on Jesus, but also you need to work to keep this salvation. You're saved by grace, kept by the law, essentially is what they're doing. So they always point you back to the law. But if you look at the law was what we would say is a conditional covenant. It's bilateral. It was two-directional. So it was a covenant that God made with Israel, the nation of Israel, who the first covenant was given to. And it can be summed up with two phrases, if ye and I will. So God is basically saying, if ye do this and you keep my laws and you keep my statutes and new commandments, I will bless you. And then he goes on to say, it says, if ye will not, then I also will not keep, and then this is the blessings. Remember Moses comes in, it's a blessing and a curse. That's there's two directions there on that covenant. Yes. Yes. Yeah. He wrestled with that all the way through his ministry because they always wanted to go back and attach it. And for them, it was the sign of circumcision that they were saying. But basically, circumcision is raising the flag to say, yes, I keep the law. Nowadays, it's Sabbath. Sabbath is the flag that is raised to say, yes, we keep the law of God. But it's the same idea of what Paul wrestled with. Galatians, Colossians, he deals with it in 2 Corinthians. They went up in Acts, they went up to Jerusalem to deal with that very issue. And when they said, should they be circumcised? Should they keep the law? And they come to this conclusion. James writes and says, why should we put a burden upon them that neither we nor our fathers were able to bear? Why are we trying to put them under the yoke of bondage? We couldn't even keep it ourselves, and we want the Gentiles to try and keep the law? He says, no, just go and serve God. Gave a couple of things that he said, and only went, think of the poor, don't offer unto idols, and no blood. And then they said, go serve, go live. But so in Leviticus it sums up, that old covenant can be summed up bilaterally, if ye, I will. They're the two sort of things. There's two responsibilities. Now in that covenant, God was faithful to his side. Israel was not faithful. They never did what they said they would do on that covenant. And always that's going to be the fault. That the fault is always with sinful man not being able to live up to the standards that God expects. That's sin. Hebrews says, and finding fault with them, he says, I will. And then he goes on to give the new covenant. And the new covenant is unilateral. Means one direction. It's unconditional. It's not based on what you do or don't do. It's based on what Jesus has done. And so God comes in and he saves us unilaterally. All we do is believe. And you believe on Jesus, Jesus does it. And we don't lose that. We don't gain it, keep it, or lose it by anything that we do. It's by grace. If it's not grace, it's of works. And he says you can't combine the two. But the old covenant absolutely is bilateral, two-directional. If ye, I will. So he says this, if ye walk in verse 3, Leviticus 26, if ye walk in my statutes and keep my commandments and do them, then I will give you rain in due season, and land shall yield her increase. The trees of the field shall yield their fruit. Your threshing shall reach unto the vintage, and the vintage shall reach unto the sowing time, and you shall eat your bread to the full, and dwell in your land safely. I'll give you peace. I will give you peace. And he goes on. I love that, though. Those verses there are so descriptive of what God is saying. The rain and the latter rain, I only learned a couple of years ago what that actually meant. Coming from a farming background, I probably should have known it. But that rain at seed time in May, or whenever it is they do seed time, around May, they need a little bit of rain just in that time, and just needs enough to wet down like an inch or so into the soil. And then they come along, and as soon as they get that former rain, they go out and they sow the seed, and there's a little bit of moisture in it, and it germinates and it takes root. Then it just sits dormant for a long time during the winter, and then they get the latter rains, which have been going through. The latter rains is at the end of summer into the springtime, and the latter rains gets, again, a little bit of moisture get into those crops, and they just leap out of the ground all the way now through to harvest in October and November, and they just come up. And they need the former rain, they get the little bit of former rain, and they get the latter rain, and they get bumper crops as a result of it. And God is saying, I will bring the former rain and the latter rain, and you will get bumper crops from these things. Then he goes on to say about the vintage. The vintage is grapes. Grapes is a summer fruit. So you get the grape vineyards will start to grow, and then they start to pick them in January, February, March, or something like that. And he's saying, I'm going to give you so much that you'll be threshing the wheat, taking the wheat and the ear of corn and what they're doing. They're threshing in the threshing floor, and they're getting the grain out. He says, you're going to have so much grain come from your harvest time that it's going to keep you busy all summer, all the way through to the time that you're picking grapes. You'll still be doing grain, because I'm going to bless you so much, and then I'm going to give you so many grapes from the vineyard that you're going to be taking your shoes off, squishing grapes all the way through to October when it's time to pick the grain again. He says, I'm just going to bless you so much. And that's what he's saying. I'll give you the former rain and the latter rain, and your threshing, verse 5, shall reach unto your vintage, and your vintage shall reach unto the sowing time, and you shall eat your bread to the full and dwell in your land safely. These are the blessings of God. And there's a flow-on effect to that. Economically, there's a flow-on effect to that. They have so much that they can't keep it all, so what do they do with it? They're now selling it on to other countries, and they're net producers, and there's income that's coming in from this, and people are living high on the hog. No, they're not living high on the hog. They're living high on the lamb. They don't live high on the hog in Israel. They live high on whatever they're living good. They're living off the fat of the land. That's the Bible terminology. They're blessed, right? That's the blessings of God. But if you look at verse 14, if ye will not hearken unto me, and will not do all these commandments, and then he goes through, and I will abhor you. He starts saying, we'll go to Deuteronomy. We'll look at that from Deuteronomy really quickly. Deuteronomy, turn over a couple of pages. Deuteronomy means, second law, second giving of the law. Yeah, well, that's right. Yeah, that's what Deuteronomy means, second law. So the second time, it's Leviticus basically again repackaged. Leviticus was given at Mount Sinai at the beginning of the 40-year wanderings. Deuteronomy, Moses gives it right as he's about to depart, and he gives it again and restates some things and gives them. That's what Deuteronomy is. So in chapter number 28, you find the same thing of Leviticus 26, where he talks about the law is bilateral. There's responsibilities of Israel that they committed before God, and there's responsibilities of God. And Deuteronomy 28, that it says, verse 1 says, and it shall come to pass, if thou shalt hearken diligently unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe and to do all the commandments which I have commanded thee this day, that the Lord thy God will set thee on high above all nations, and these blessings shall come upon thee. And blessed thou shalt be in the city, and blessed thou shalt be in the field, and the fruit of the body, and the fruit of the ground, and the fruit of the cattle, and the increase of thy kind, and the flocks of the sheep. God's going to bless them if they do that. And then he says, but if they don't, then there's results to that as well. Look at verse number 15. But it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe to do all the commandments and his statutes which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee. Cursed thou shalt be in the city, and in the field, and the basket, and thy store, and the fruit of thy body, and the land, and the increase of the kine, and the sheep. They're all going to be cursed. And if you keep reading down, it says in verse number 23, and thy heaven that is over thy head shall be brass, and the earth that is under thee shall be iron. Well, that doesn't sound very fruitful. No more rain, and then the ground starts to dry up as well. Nothing's growing. And then nothing's growing, and then there's poverty, and there's sorrow, and there's economic hardships. All of those things was God dealing with the nation of Israel to bring them back to Him. They were supposed to, in those times, when things got difficult and hard, it was to humble them that they might acknowledge their sin, turn, get back to God, and God says, I'll bring it all back again, and I'll bless you. You get right with me, and I'll bring the blessings back. And then look at this. It says in verse... somewhere there, it says about locusts. That's where we're trying to get to. Anybody see a locust in Deuteronomy 28? Thank you. Go back to 38. Thou shalt carry much seed into the field, and thou shalt gather but little in, for the locust shall consume it. Thou shalt plant vineyards and dress them, but thou shalt neither drink of the wine nor gather the grape, for the worms shall eat them. Thou shalt have olive trees throughout all thy coasts, but thou shalt not anoint thyself with oil, for thine olive shall cast his fruit. Thou shalt beget sons and daughters, but thou shalt not enjoy them, for they shall go into captivity. Anybody remember the little miniature missionary? You know what she was? She was a captive, put in captivity, an Israelite in captivity. God is saying, all of these things are what I'm going to bring, and each judgment progressively got worse and more severe. And it says this, thou shalt, verse 42, all thy trees and the fruit of thy land shall the locust consume. So twice he mentions the locusts. The locusts are part of the judgment of God. He says, I will bring the locusts, and they will be a plague if it's part of the law and part of the covenant and part of all of that. The very end of this, at the end of 26, if you were to read Leviticus 26, and if you were to read through the end of Deuteronomy 28, which we're not going to do because of time tonight, he says, I will remove you from the land. So it's almost like a checklist that they can look back, Israel can look back and think, you know what? We've gone through times of drought. We've gone through locusts, and the worm has consumed us. We've seen enemies arise, and there not been peace and safety, and some of us have even been taken into captivity. And then all of these things are happening all the way down to, he says that you shall eat your sons and your daughters, which is horrendous. But guess what they saw? Guess what was taking place in Samaria when Sennacherib from the north came and besieged the city, until it says that a dove's dung was sold for a farthing. They were selling dove's dung. That was what they had. And then you have the ladies that they said, today we will eat my son and tomorrow we'll eat your son. And then they ate the first son, and then they came to eat the day they were to eat the second son, and she hid her son, and the one whose child they ate is pleading before the king saying, it's not fair. We ate my son. You think, how do you get to a stage like that? But so sore was the famine upon the place. And I always have to think of, it's not just that they were depraved, that's out of utter desperation. And maybe even the child was dead. Because, I don't know if you know about the Andes crash, right? The rugby or soccer, whatever they were, that crashed in the Andes. And they started eating the dead bodies that were preserved in the snow, and they were Catholics and they were against their conviction to do so, but such was the desperate nature of the situation that they found themselves in the Andes Mountains that they started to eat parts of the flesh to just survive. And they were saying, God, please don't judge us for what we're doing here. We're only doing this to survive. There's nothing up here in the mountains. And then after like a couple of months, someone walked out, and then they were able to come back and rescue them after a long period of time. But they turned to cannibalism because of the absolute desperation that they were in. And that's if they went through Leviticus 26 and they went through Deuteronomy 28, they could say, yep, this has taken place in the land, and yep, this has taken place, and this has taken place, this has taken place. And that's how you can stay. How do we know who's speaking for God? Well, even in those days, they could go back and say, man, Joel's message is absolutely lining up with what Moses said. And Jeremiah was lining up with what they said in the Leviticus and in Deuteronomy. It's like what the law said. So all of this sorrow that's coming on them is according to their sin. And what is he asking them to do? Verse 13, gird yourselves, lament, ye priests, howl, ye ministers of the altar, come, lie all night in the sackcloth. This absolute devastation. I don't know if somebody seen a locust plague? I've only seen once in my life, and that was when I was probably, I don't even know how old I was, maybe Maddie's age. And so that puts it like late 80s, maybe the 90s, some of the early 90s. And I remember being out in 2J and there was a plague of locusts that came through and was eating everything and devouring. I mean, they were everywhere, climbing up over things. I remember Dad said, don't open the door, because he was out fixing a pump or something out there. And he says, don't leave the car door open, because you know what? Man, they just came in and they were just climbing over everything. And I remember as a kid, they're jumping on you and they're just everywhere. There's some places in Africa, if you look up YouTube videos of locust swarms, and it says so dark as this, it says that the sun and the stars don't shine. I mean, it's just this massive dark cloud that just blakens everything. And then it says it's like a Garden of Eden before them, it says in chapter number 2, and it's a barren wasteland after. And we'll get to that. Think of that as sin. That's what sin does. It takes the Garden of Eden and turns it into a wasteland. It's what sin does, and God was showing that through the first covenant, that sin brings wastedness, and all those things are there, and it ties into the day of the Lord. And I'll leave off tonight with that, but this is absolutely connected to the law, and God is bringing upon them exactly what he said would come upon them because of sin. And it's all of this is a precursor to the judgment of God, which is then depicts ultimately the end judgment of God, which is the great day of the Lord, which is also going to be sorrow and howling. Drunkard, did you notice in there? Oh man, there's more that we just got to pass over it. But did you notice that the drunkards and the priests are both howling? I mean, it doesn't matter. It affects everybody. And that's what the judgment of God, when it comes, is going to affect everybody, from the drunkard to the priest. The great day of the Lord is going to be what it is. But anyway, we'll leave off there, and if you want to continue discussion, we'll do it around a coffee or a tea in the supper room. But we're going to get some prayer done as well tonight. So if you've got your prayer cards, find a prayer partner or two.